The parking lot is empty. Snow falls on abandoned shopping carts. Inside the mall, a security guard sits alone, his badge reflecting the dim emergency lights. His name is Frank. 3 days ago, on Christmas Eve, thieves took everything, not just merchandise. They took his faith in humanity. Desolate by robbery, the news called it. But Frank lost more than property that night. He lost his purpose. 23 years protecting this place. 23 years believing he made a difference. Gone in minutes. Then, through the silence, a voice echoes across the parking lot. Not just any voice, a voice that built dreams from broken promises, a voice that turned working-class pain into poetry. Bruce Springsteen walks through those automatic doors, guitar in hand, snow on his shoulders. He doesn't know Frank's name yet, but he knows that look, that weight, that darkness that swallows good men whole. What happens when a rock legend meets a forgotten hero? When music meets silence? When hope walks into a desolate mall on the coldest night after Christmas? This is their story. A story about how one song, one moment, one unexpected kindness can resurrect a man's soul. The mall was desolate by robbery, but tonight it becomes something else entirely. The fluorescent lights hummed their lonely song through the empty corridors of Willowbrook Mall. Frank Morrison sat in the security office, staring at blank monitors that once showed bustling shoppers, happy families, children's laughter echoing through the halls. Now, only darkness stared back. 3 nights had passed since Christmas Eve. 3 nights since everything changed. Frank's weathered hands trembled slightly as he lifted the cold coffee to his lips. 62 years old, 23 years of service, and it all meant nothing now. The badge on his chest felt heavier than it had ever been, not with authority, but with failure. The robbery had been precise, professional. They'd waited until the mall closed early on Christmas Eve, when skeleton crew staffing left gaps everywhere. Frank had been making his rounds on the north side when they struck the south. By the time he responded to the silent alarm, they were gone. The jewelry stores, emptied. The electronics retailer, ransacked. The charity collection for the children's hospital, every penny stolen. But it wasn't the missing merchandise that haunted Frank. It was the security footage he'd watched afterward. The timestamp showing him oblivious, checking doors while families' Christmas presents disappeared, while the children's hospital fund vanished into the night, while everything he'd sworn to protect was taken. The mall owners hadn't fired him. That almost made it worse. "Not your fault, Frank," they'd said. Could have happened to anyone. But Frank knew better. A real security guard would have sensed something, would have been there, would have stopped it. Outside, snow began to fall heavier, coating the parking lot in pristine white that mocked the darkness inside. The mall had been closed since the robbery, indefinitely, they said. Insurance investigators, police tape, corporate decisions to be made. But Frank still came, every night, sitting in his office, replaying that night, wondering what he could have done differently. Margaret, the night janitor, had tried to console him. "Frank, honey, you're not Superman. You're one man trying to protect a whole mall." But Frank couldn't accept that. For 23 years, this mall had been his responsibility. He knew every store owner by name, watched their kids grow up, walked brides-to-be to their cars after late-night dress shopping, helped lost children find their parents. He wasn't just security, he was the guardian of this community's gathering place. Now, that community was shattered. The local news had been brutal. Mall security fails to prevent massive Christmas heist. Families' gifts gone. Where was security? The comments online were worse. People he'd protected for decades now questioned if he'd been in on it, if he'd been paid to look the other way. Frank's daughter, Sarah, had called from Seattle. "Dad, please, come stay with us for a while. You don't need to keep torturing yourself." But leaving felt like admitting defeat, like confirming what everyone thought, that Frank Morrison was a failure who couldn't protect anything that mattered. The radio in the corner crackled with static. Frank had left it on for company, tuned to the oldies station that played through the mall speakers during business hours. But tonight, Even the music felt hollow. Those songs about better days, about dreams and hope, they belonged to a different world, a world before the robbery. He pulled out the letter from his pocket, his resignation letter, typed and retyped a dozen times. The words blurred through his tired eyes. After much consideration, no longer able to fulfill, effective immediately. Tomorrow, he'd decided. Tomorrow he'd turn it in and disappear. Let them find someone younger, sharper, someone who wouldn't fail when it mattered most. The sound of a car engine broke through his thoughts. Frank looked up at the monitor showing the parking lot entrance. A vintage Corvette, snow-covered but unmistakable, pulled into the lot. Strange. The mall was closed. The parking lot was supposed to be empty, except for his old pickup truck. He watched as the car parked near the main entrance. A figure emerged, carrying what looked like a guitar case. The person walked with purpose toward the doors, and Frank's training kicked in. He stood, adjusted his uniform, and headed out of the office. As he approached the main entrance, he could see the figure more clearly through the glass doors. Denim jacket, worn jeans, a face that seemed familiar, but impossible. The man was trying the door, finding it locked, then noticed Frank approaching from inside. Their eyes met through the glass, and Frank's breath caught. It couldn't be, but it was. Bruce Springsteen stood outside Willowbrook Mall at 11 p.m. on a snowy December night, guitar case in hand, looking directly at him. Frank's hands fumbled with his keys as he unlocked the door. "Mr. Springsteen, sir? The mall is closed. There's been a robbery. We're not—" "I know," Bruce said, his voice carrying that distinctive gravel that had soundtracked Frank's entire adult life. "I heard about it. That's why I'm here." Frank stepped back, confused, as Bruce entered. Snow fell from his shoulders onto the mall's polished floor. Up close, he looked older than his stage persona, but his eyes held an intensity that hadn't dimmed. "I don't understand," Frank said. "Why would you—" "Your daughter," Bruce said simply. "Sarah. She wrote to me, sent a letter to my management, somehow got it through. She told me about you, about what happened here, about how you've been sitting in this empty mall every night since, blaming yourself." Frank felt his legs weaken. He reached for the wall to steady himself. "Sarah, she wrote to you?" Bruce nodded, setting down his guitar case. "She told me how you raised her alone after her mother passed, how you worked every holiday, every weekend to put her through college, how you played my music in the car every morning when you drove her to school, Born to Run when she was scared about tests, The Rising after 9/11 when she couldn't understand the world anymore." Tears threatened at the corners of Frank's eyes. He hadn't cried since Mary's funeral 15 years ago. But now, "She told me," Bruce continued, "that you see yourself in my songs. The working man trying to do right, trying to protect what matters. And she told me that right now you can't hear those songs anymore, that the music died for you 3 nights ago." Frank turned away, unable to face the compassion in those famous eyes. "She shouldn't have bothered you. You're Bruce Springsteen. You've got important things—" "Stop." Bruce's voice was firm but gentle. "You know what's important. A man who's protected his community for 23 years. A father who raised a daughter strong enough and brave enough to reach out to a stranger to help her dad. That's important." Bruce picked up his guitar case and looked around the empty mall. "She sent me something else too. A video from 2 years ago. The mall's Christmas concert. You in your uniform, singing 'Santa Claus is Coming to Town' with a group of kids from the children's hospital, the same hospital whose charity fund was stolen." Frank remembered that day. The kids had been so excited, their faces bright despite their illnesses. He'd felt foolish singing, but their joy had been worth any embarrassment. "You want to know why I'm really here?" Bruce asked. "Because I've been where you are. Not exactly the same, but I know what it's like to feel like you've let everyone down, to feel like the thing you were supposed to be, the protector, the voice, the strength, that you've failed at it." He opened his guitar case, pulling out a well-worn acoustic guitar. After Born to Run hit, I had this crisis. Lawsuits, disputes, couldn't record for 3 years. I thought I'd failed everyone who believed in me. Sat in my house, staring at guitars I couldn't bring myself to play. Know what pulled me out? Frank shook his head. Someone reminded me that the music wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about never failing. It was about getting back up, about finding grace in the trying, not just the succeeding. Bruce strummed a few chords, the sound echoing through the empty mall with surprising warmth. Your daughter told me this mall isn't just a building to you. It's every shop owner you've walked to their car late at night. Every teenager you've talked to when they were hanging around looking lost. Every mother you've helped find her kid in the chaos of Black Friday. The chords became a melody, simple but haunting. Frank recognized it. Not one of Bruce's hits, but something new, something being born right here in this moment. She told me about Maria, the woman who runs the coffee stand, how you helped her when her husband was deported, connected her with lawyers. About Tom from the bookstore, how you covered his shifts when his son was in the hospital. About the teenage girl you noticed was being followed last summer, how you walked her to her car and stayed until the guy left. Frank hadn't known anyone had noticed these things. They were just part of the job, part of being human. You think you failed because some professionals robbed this place on Christmas Eve? Bruce continued, his fingers finding a rhythm on the strings. Frank, you succeeded every single day for 23 years. You can't let one night erase 8,435 nights of keeping people safe. But the Children's Hospital Fund, Frank said, his voice breaking. Those kids needed that money. Bruce stopped playing and reached into his jacket pocket. He pulled out a check and handed it to Frank. Frank's eyes widened at the amount. It was double what had been stolen from the charity fund. That's not from me, Bruce said. Well, I added to it, but that's from the people your daughter contacted. Maria, Tom, that teenage girl. She's in college now, by the way. Store owners from the past 2 decades. People whose names you probably don't even remember, but who remember you. They all contributed when they heard what happened. Frank stared at the check, his hands shaking. I can't. You can and you will, Bruce said, because those kids need it. And because accepting help doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Bruce started playing again, and this time words came with the melody. In a mall that's standing empty, where the Christmas lights don't shine, sits a guardian with a heavy heart, counting lonely time. But 23 years of kindness don't disappear with snow, and every soul you've lifted up wants you to know. Frank listened, transfixed, as Bruce crafted a song from his story. Not a song about failure, but about resilience, about community, about how one person's dedication ripples out in waves they never see. You know what your daughter told me she wanted for Christmas? Bruce asked between verses. She said she didn't care about presents. She just wanted her dad to understand that he's a hero. Not because he stopped every bad thing, nobody can do that, but because he showed up every day trying to make things a little safer, a little better. Bruce stood, still playing, and started walking deeper into the mall. Frank followed, drawn by the music echoing off the walls. They passed the empty stores, the dead fountain, the abandoned food court. But somehow, with Bruce's voice filling the space, it didn't feel desolate anymore. I've played Madison Square Garden, Bruce said, pausing at the mall's center court. Stadiums around the world. But right now, this might be the most important show I've ever done. Because it's for an audience of one. A good man who needs to remember who he is. He launched into The Rising, but changed the words, personalizing them for Frank, for this moment, for this place. Frank found himself singing along, softly at first, then stronger. His voice, rough from lack of use, joined with Bruce's in the empty mall. As they sang, something shifted. The weight that had been crushing Frank's chest for 3 days began to lift. Not completely, but enough to breathe. Enough to remember that he wasn't defined by one night of failure, but by thousands of nights of service. You know, Bruce said as the song ended, Sarah told me something else. She said every morning when you drove her to school, you'd tell her the same thing. We might not be rich, baby, but we're rich in what matters. You remember that? Frank nodded, tears flowing freely now. She's a lawyer now, your Sarah, public defender. Helps people who can't afford help. She said she learned that from you, that real wealth isn't what you have, it's what you give. And Frank, you've given this community 23 years of yourself. Bruce pulled out his phone. She's been waiting for my call. Told her I'd let her know how it went. He dialed, then handed the phone to Frank. Dad? Sarah's voice was anxious, hopeful. Sarah, honey, Frank managed through his tears. You didn't need to. Yes, I did, she interrupted. Dad, you're my hero. You always have been. And I'm not the only one who thinks so. Please don't give up. Please don't resign. That mall needs you. The community needs you. I need you to be the father who taught me that falling down doesn't mean staying down. Frank looked at Bruce, who was smiling, adjusting his guitar. How did you know about the resignation letter? Lucky guess, Bruce said. It's what I would have done. What I almost did once upon a time. But someone reminded me that the world needs its guardians, especially the imperfect ones. They're the ones who understand what it really costs to keep trying. They talked for another hour, Bruce sharing stories from his own struggles, his own failures and resurrections. He told Frank about the lawsuits that nearly ended his career, the depression that followed success, the constant battle between who he was and who people expected him to be. You know what I learned? Bruce said as they walked back toward the entrance. The robbery doesn't define this mall. You do. Every person you've helped, every night you've kept watch, every small act of kindness, that's what this place really is. And that can't be stolen. As they reached the doors, Bruce turned back to look at the empty mall one more time. Sarah asked me to give you something else. He reached into his guitar case and pulled out a harmonica. She said you always wanted to learn, but never had time. Frank took the harmonica, its metal cold in his hands. I don't even know how to play. That's the point, Bruce said. Starting something new at 62, proving you're not done, that there's still music to make, even after the silence. Bruce moved toward the door, then stopped. Oh, and Frank, the mall owners, they're going to get a call tomorrow from my management. We want to do a benefit concert here when you reopen, for the children's hospital. I'm thinking we could use a security guard who knows how to sing backup. Frank stood speechless as Bruce Springsteen walked back to his car, snow swirling around him like a scene from a dream. But it wasn't a dream. The check in his pocket was real. The harmonica in his hand was real. The warmth in his chest where ice had been was real. As the Corvette's tail lights disappeared into the snowy night, Frank walked back to his office. He picked up the resignation letter, read it one more time, then tore it into pieces. He sat at his desk, pulled out his phone, and scrolled through the messages he'd been ignoring for 3 days. Dozens of them. From store owners, from people he'd helped over the years, all saying the same thing. We believe in you, Frank. Don't give up. He'd been so focused on his failure that he'd missed the truth. He hadn't been guarding a building. He'd been guarding a community. And that community was guarding him right back. Frank picked up the harmonica, brought it to his lips, and blew a single, uncertain note. It wavered, unclear, imperfect, but it was a start. In the empty mall, with snow falling outside and Bruce Springsteen's music still echoing in his memory, Frank Morrison began to learn a new song. The next morning, when Margaret arrived for her shift, she found Frank in the food court, practicing harmonica while watching the sunrise through the skylights. The resignation letter was in the trash, replaced by a different piece of paper on his desk, a set list for a benefit concert with security guard Frank Morrison, backup vocals, written at the bottom. "Frank," Margaret called out. "You okay, honey?" Frank lowered the harmonica and smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him in days. "Yeah, Margaret, I'm okay. Actually, I'm better than okay. I'm ready to get back to work." The mall would reopen in a week. There would be new security measures, new procedures, lessons learned from the robbery. But there would also be Frank Morrison, standing watch as he had for 23 years, Not perfect, not invincible, but present, faithful, determined. 3 months later, Willowbrook Mall hosted its first concert event. Bruce Springsteen and the E Street Band played to a packed center court, with all proceeds going to the Children's Hospital. During glory days, Bruce called Frank on stage. "This is Frank Morrison," Bruce announced to the crowd. "He's been protecting this community for 23 years. On Christmas Eve, some thieves stole from these stores. But they couldn't steal what really matters, the spirit of a man who shows up every day to keep others safe. Frank, this one's for you." They launched into a special version of Born to Run, with Frank on harmonica. He missed a few notes, went flat on others, but nobody cared. The crowd, his community, cheered like he was playing Carnegie Hall. In the audience, Sarah watched her father on stage with Bruce Springsteen, playing harmonica badly but with complete joy. She held her phone up, recording the moment, already planning to send it to Bruce's management with another note. "Thank you for giving me my father back." After the concert, as the crowd dispersed and the cleanup began, Frank returned to his security office. The monitors showed a mall full of life again. Families, teenagers, elderly couples walking hand in hand, his mall, his responsibility, his privilege. A knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. A young boy, maybe 10 years old, stood there with his mother. The boy held out a hand-drawn picture, a figure in a security uniform, standing tall, with a cape flowing behind him, and the words, "Thank you, Mr. Frank," written in crayon at the bottom. "He wanted to give this to you," the mother said. "You helped us last year when we got locked out of our car. You stayed with us for an hour in the rain until Durzee came." He never forgot. Frank took the picture, his eyes misting again. After they left, he pinned it to his bulletin board, right next to the photo from the concert, the check presentation to the Children's Hospital, and Sarah's graduation picture. The phone rang. It was Bruce calling from the road. "How you doing, Frank?" "Good, Mr. Springsteen. Real good. It's Bruce. And I wanted to tell you something. That song I started writing in your mall. I finished it. It's going on the next album. It's called The Guardian. It's about people like you, the ones who stand watch, the ones who don't make headlines until something goes wrong, but who make everything right just by being there." Frank couldn't speak for a moment. When he found his voice, all he could say was, "Thank you. No, Frank, thank you for reminding me what real heroism looks like. It's not the guy on stage. It's the guy checking doors at 2 a.m. to make sure everyone's safe." After Bruce hung up, Frank sat in his office looking at his monitors, watching over his mall. The harmonica sat on his desk, a reminder that it's never too late to learn something new. The torn pieces of his resignation letter had long since been thrown away, but he kept one small piece in his wallet, a single word: failure. He kept it not as a weight, but as a reminder that failure is just a chapter, not the whole story. 6 months after the robbery, a documentary crew arrived at Willowbrook Mall. They were filming a piece about Bruce's benefit concerts, about communities coming together. They interviewed Frank for 3 hours, but he barely talked about himself. Instead, he told them about Maria's coffee, about Tom's bookstore, about every shop owner and their dreams. He told them about Margaret, who had worked nights for 15 years, putting 3 kids through college. He told them about the community that existed within these walls. When the documentary aired, it wasn't really about the robbery or even the concert. It was about Frank Morrison and the invisible guardians in every community who hold things together through their quiet, consistent presence. The title was simple: Standing Watch. Bruce sent him a text the night it aired. "You know what the best part of being Bruce Springsteen is? Getting to meet the real heroes. Keep standing watch, Frank. The world needs guardians like you." A year passed. The mall thrived. The Children's Hospital built a new wing with the money raised from the benefit concert and continuing donations. They named it the Morrison-Springsteen Wing, despite Frank's protests that his name didn't belong next to Bruce's. "Are you kidding?" the hospital administrator had said. Half these donations came because of your story. People give because they see themselves in you, the everyday hero who just keeps showing up. On the anniversary of the robbery, Frank arrived at work to find his office decorated. Balloons, a cake, and a crowd of people. Store owners, customers, other security guards from malls across the state who had heard his story. Sarah had flown in from Seattle with her new fiancé, a man Frank had yet to meet. "Dad," she said, pulling him aside. "This is James. He's a social worker, works with at-risk youth. I told him about you, about how you've always protected people. He said that's what made him fall in love with me, that I was raised by someone who understood that real strength is in serving others." Frank shook James's hand, seeing in the young man's eyes the same dedication he'd tried to live by all these years. As the party continued, Margaret pulled Frank aside. "You know what's different about this place now, Frank? After everything that happened." "What's that?" "Hope," she said simply. "Before, this was just a mall. Now it's a place where Bruce Springsteen played harmonica with a security guard, where a community proved that we take care of our own, where falling down became the beginning of rising up." That night, after everyone had gone home, Frank made his rounds. He checked every door, every lock, every corner of the mall, not because he was afraid of another robbery, but because this was his calling, this simple, essential act of keeping watch. In his pocket, the harmonica Bruce had given him was worn smooth from practice. He could play several songs now, self-taught through YouTube videos and sheer determination. Sometimes late at night he'd play in the empty food court, the notes echoing through the space like a prayer. 2 years after the robbery, Bruce returned to Willowbrook Mall. Not for a concert this time, but just to visit. He found Frank in his office reviewing security footage. "Still standing watch?" Frank stood, shaking Bruce's hand warmly. "Always." They walked through the mall together, Bruce listening as Frank updated him on everyone. Maria had expanded her coffee stand into a full cafe. Tom's bookstore was hosting author readings. The teenage girl Frank had protected was graduating from college with honors, planning to become a social worker. "You know what you've done here, Frank," Bruce said, as they stood in the center court where the benefit concert had been. "You've proved that one person's dedication can hold a community together. That's the real American dream. Not fame or fortune, but showing up for each other." Bruce pulled out his phone and showed Frank a video. It was from a concert the night before, 20,000 people singing along to a song. Frank recognized the melody. It was the song Bruce had started writing in this very mall. "Listen to the words," Bruce said. Frank listened as 20,000 voices sang about a guardian who stands watch, about falling down and getting up, about the wealth that can't be stolen. They were singing about him, but more than that, they were singing about themselves, about everyone who keeps showing up despite the setbacks. That's your legacy, Frank. Not stopping one robbery, but inspiring thousands to believe in the power of simply showing up. As Bruce prepared to leave, he turned back one more time. "Oh, I almost forgot." He handed Frank an envelope. Inside were 2 tickets and backstage passes to his upcoming show at MetLife Stadium. "Bring Sarah," Bruce said. "I want her to see 80,000 people singing her father's song." Frank tried to protest, but Bruce was already walking away, calling back over his shoulder, "And bring your harmonica. You're sitting in on glory days." The night of the concert, Frank stood on stage at MetLife Stadium, harmonica in hand, looking out at a sea of faces. Sarah stood in the wings, tears streaming down her face, James's arm around her shoulders. As the opening notes of Glory Days began, Bruce walked over and put his hand on Frank's shoulder. "This is for all the guardians," Bruce announced to the crowd. "The security guards, the night janitors, the nurses, the teachers, everyone who stands watch. This is Frank Morrison, and he's going to help me remind you that glory days aren't just in the past. They're every day you choose to show up for others." Frank played his harmonica, not perfectly but with heart, and 80,000 people cheered. In that moment he understood that the robbery hadn't been the end of his story. It had been the beginning of understanding what his story really was. After the concert, driving home with Sarah and James, Frank was quiet. Finally, Sarah asked, "What are you thinking about, Dad?" "Your mother," Frank said, wishing she could have seen this. "Could have seen what you've become, what we've become. She knows, Dad. She always knew you were a hero. You're the only one who needed convincing." Frank smiled, watching the highway roll by. Tomorrow, he'd be back at the mall, checking doors, watching monitors, keeping his community safe. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was his work, and now he understood its true value. A month later, Frank received a package. Inside was a platinum record. Bruce's new album had gone platinum, and the song The Guardian was being called an anthem for working-class heroes everywhere. The note attached said simply, "For the real Guardian, thank you for the song." Frank hung the platinum record in his security office at Willowbrook Mall, right between the child's drawing of him as a superhero and the photo from the benefit concert. Every day, security guards from other malls would stop by to see it, to hear the story, to be reminded that their work mattered. "You know what Bruce told me?" Frank would tell them. "He said the world doesn't need more superstars. It needs more people willing to be everyday heroes. People who understand that standing watch isn't about being perfect, it's about being present." 5 years after the robbery, Frank Morrison retired. The mall threw him a celebration that filled the center court. Bruce couldn't attend, but sent a video message that played on the mall's main screen. "Frank Morrison taught me something important," Bruce said in the message. "That real glory isn't in the spotlight. It's in the shadows, where people like Frank stand guard so the rest of us can live our lives safely. Frank, you've earned your rest, but you'll never stop being a guardian. It's not what you did, it's who you are." In retirement, Frank volunteered at the Children's Hospital, teaching young patients to play harmonica. He'd tell them stories about the night Bruce Springsteen came to an empty mall, about how falling down doesn't mean staying down, about finding music even in the silence. One day, a young boy with leukemia asked him, "Mr. Frank, were you scared when the robbery happened?" Frank thought for a moment. "Terrified," he admitted. "Not of the robbers, but of having let everyone down." "But you didn't let anyone down," the boy said. "No," Frank agreed, "but sometimes we can't see that in the moment. Sometimes it takes a friend or a daughter or even a rock star to remind us who we really are." The boy smiled. "Will you teach me the song? The one Bruce Springsteen wrote about you?" Frank picked up his harmonica. "I'll do better than that. I'll teach you to write your own song, because everyone has a song inside them. Sometimes it just takes a while to find the right notes." As he played, Frank thought about that night in the empty mall, when he'd thought his story was over. He thought about Bruce's words, about Sarah's faith in him, about a community that had rallied around their fallen guardian. He thought about how the worst night of his professional life had led to the greatest understanding of his true worth. The harmonica's notes filled the hospital room, imperfect but genuine, like life itself. The boy listened, eyes bright with hope, already humming along. Another guardian in the making, Frank thought. Another person who would learn that heroism isn't about never falling. It's about always getting back up. 10 years after the robbery, a book was published. The Guardian, the true story of Frank Morrison and the night Bruce Springsteen saved a soul. It became a bestseller, with all proceeds going to the Children's Hospital. The dedication read, "To all the guardians standing watch tonight, you are seen, you are valued, you are heroes." Frank, now 72, still played harmonica in the hospital. Still walked through Willowbrook Mall occasionally, greeting the new security team, sharing stories with young guards who looked at him with awe. He'd become a legend, but he still saw himself as just Frank, the guy who'd shown up for work every night for 23 years. One evening, his phone rang. It was Bruce. "Frank, I'm playing a small acoustic show, private event for first responders and essential workers. I want you there. Front row." "Bruce, I'm retired. I'm not a... You're a guardian, Frank. That never retires. You stood watch for 23 years. You're still standing watch, just in different ways. The show's not complete without you. At the show, Bruce dedicated the entire second half to songs about working-class heroes, about resilience, about community. Before the last song, he called Frank on stage. 10 years ago, Bruce told the intimate audience of police officers, firefighters, nurses, security guards, and janitors, "This man taught me something. He taught me that we all fall down, every single one of us. But heroes aren't the ones who never fall. They're the ones who help others get back up, even when they're down themselves." He handed Frank a harmonica. Not just any harmonica, but the one Frank had left in his security office when he retired, the one Bruce had given him that snowy night. "I've been keeping this safe," Bruce said, "like you kept that mall safe. Like you keep spirits safe now at the hospital. Play us home, Frank." Together they played The Rising. But it wasn't about rising from tragedy anymore. It was about rising every ordinary morning to do extraordinary things in small ways. It was about Frank checking doors at 2 a.m., about Margaret mopping floors while her kids slept, about every person in that audience who kept the world running while others slept safely. As the last note faded, the audience stood as one, not in celebrity worship, but in recognition of themselves, their work, their worth. Frank Morrison, the security guard who'd once sat alone in an empty mall, believing he was a failure, now stood on stage with Bruce Springsteen, both of them servants of something greater than fame or success, the simple, profound act of showing up for others. Walking off stage, Bruce stopped Frank with a hand on his shoulder. "You know what? I've played for presidents and royalty, for millions of people across the world. But that night in your mall, playing for you alone, that might have been the most important concert I ever gave." "Why?" Frank asked. "Because it reminded me why I started making music in the first place. Not to be a star, but to tell the stories of people like you, to let you know you're not alone, to prove that there's nobility in the struggle, grace in the everyday, and heroism in just keeping watch." That night, driving home, Frank passed Willowbrook Mall. It was lit up, busy with late-night shoppers. Through the windows he could see the security guard making rounds, checking doors, keeping watch. Frank pulled into the parking lot and walked to the main entrance. The young guard recognized him immediately. "Mr. Morrison, sir, what brings you here?" "Just wanted to tell you something," Frank said. "Something Bruce Springsteen told me once. You're not guarding a building, you're guarding a community. Every person who walks through these doors is trusting you to keep them safe. That's not a job, that's a calling." The young guard stood straighter. "Yes, sir. I won't let them down." "You might," Frank said gently. "We all do sometimes. But that doesn't make you a failure. It makes you human, and humans who keep trying despite their failures, those are the real guardians." As Frank walked back to his car, he heard music coming from inside the mall. The young guard had a radio playing in his booth, Bruce Springsteen's The Guardian. Frank smiled, pulled out his harmonica, and played along softly in the parking lot, the notes carrying on the cold night air like a blessing. Somewhere, Sarah was putting her own children to bed, telling them stories about their grandfather, the hero who stood watch. Somewhere, Bruce was on stage, singing songs about working-class dignity. Somewhere, another security guard was making rounds, another janitor was cleaning floors, another nurse was checking on patients. The world was full of guardians, Frank realized. He'd just been lucky enough to have his story told, but every story mattered. Every person standing watch was writing their own song of dedication and service. As he drove away, Frank Morrison looked in his rear-view mirror at the mall one last time. It stood solid and bright against the darkness, protected and protecting, a symbol of community resilience. Just like him, just like all of them. The robbery that had almost broken him had instead revealed an unbreakable truth. Real wealth couldn't be stolen. It lived in the connections between people, in the showing up, in the standing watch, in the rising after the fall. And that truth, Frank knew, would echo long after the last note of any song had faded. It would live in every guardian who chose to keep standing watch, believing that their presence mattered, that their service had meaning, that their story, however humble, was worth telling. The harmonica sat on his dashboard as he drove home, catching the streetlights, a small silver reminder of the night a rock star came to an empty mall to tell a security guard what everyone else already knew. Frank Morrison was, and would always be, a hero, not because he was perfect, but because he never stopped trying to be. And in the end, that's all any guardian can do: show up, stand watch, fall down, rise again, and trust that somewhere someone sees their service and knows its true worth. The music never really stops for those who stand watch. It just plays in a different key, the quiet melody of dedication, the rhythm of routine, the harmony of humans taking care of each other in the most ordinary and extraordinary ways. Frank Morrison had learned to hear that music, and now he helped others hear it too. One note at a time, one day at a time, one act of service at a time, standing watch, always standing watch, even in retirement, even in memory, even in story. The Guardian's song plays on. Thank you for spending this time with Frank and Bruce, with guardians everywhere who stand watch. If this story moved you, remember to look for the guardians in your own life. The security officers, the janitors, the night workers who keep us safe while we sleep. Tell them their service matters. Tell them they're seen. Tell them they're heroes. And if you're one of those guardians yourself, know this: you are valued beyond measure. Your service writes a song that echoes through generations. You are the real glory days. Like and subscribe if you believe in everyday heroes. Share this story with someone who stands watch. Comment with your own guardian story, because every guardian deserves to know you are not alone. You are not forgotten. You are essential. The music plays on because of you. 15 years later, the autumn sun cast long shadows through the windows of Willowbrook Mall's new community center. Frank Morrison, now 77, sat in a circle of teenagers, his weathered hands demonstrating a C chord on the harmonica. The kids, some from juvenile detention, others from foster care, watched with unexpected attention. "Mr. Frank?" asked Marcus, a 16-year-old with trust issues deeper than the ocean. "Why do you keep coming here? You're like ancient. You could be sitting at home watching TV." Frank smiled, the lines around his eyes deepening. "You know what Bruce Springsteen told me once? He said the day we stop showing up for others is the day we start dying inside. I'm 77 years old, Marcus, but I'm more alive now than I was at 50. "But we're nobody," said Jasmine, a girl whose parents had overdosed last year. "Why do you care about teaching a bunch of throwaway kids?" Frank set down his harmonica, his expression serious. "Let me tell you something about throwaway kids. Sarah Morrison, my daughter, she was 8 when her mother died. I was a security guard working nights, no family to help, no money for good childcare. You know what people called her? A latchkey kid. Said she'd never amount to anything with a single father who worked mall security." He pulled out his phone, showing them a photo. "That's her last month, being sworn in as a federal judge. That throwaway kid now decides cases that affect millions of people. And you know what she said in her acceptance speech? She said, 'I stand here because a mall security guard taught me that everyone deserves protection, everyone deserves justice, and everyone deserves someone who believes in them.'" Marcus looked at the photo, something shifting in his guarded expression. "She really said that? About you?" "Every word," Frank confirmed. "And you know who was sitting in the front row at her swearing in? Bruce Springsteen. He flew in just for that, because he said he wanted to see how the story continued." "Wait," Jasmine interrupted. "The Bruce Springsteen? He really knows you?" Frank pulled out an old, worn photo from his wallet, him and Bruce on stage at MetLife Stadium, playing harmonica together. "We've become friends over the years. He calls me every Christmas Eve. You know why?" The kids shook their heads. Because Christmas Eve is when I learned that falling down doesn't define you. Getting back up does. And sometimes you need someone to remind you that you're worth getting back up for. Deshawn, who'd been silent in the corner, finally spoke. And my dad's in prison. Security guard at a warehouse. Got blamed for some missing inventory he didn't take. Lost everything. That's why I don't trust people like you. Frank nodded slowly. I understand that, Deshawn. I was blamed too, remember? The whole world thought I was either incompetent or corrupt. Your dad, what's his name? Jerome Williams. Frank pulled out a small notebook, writing down the name. I'm going to look into his case. I know some people, lawyers who help security personnel who've been wrongfully accused. No promises, but everyone deserves someone fighting for them. Why would you do that? Deshawn's voice cracked slightly. Because 15 years ago, when I was drowning in shame, people I didn't even know fought for me. They donated money, wrote letters, refused to let me disappear into my failure. That's what we do. We stand watch for each other. The session continued, with Frank teaching them not just harmonica, but life lessons woven through music. He told them about the documentary crew that had followed him for a year, about the book that had been written, about the thousands of letters he'd received from security guards around the world who'd found hope in his story. You know what Bruce told me last Christmas? Frank said as the session ended. He said the song, The Guardian, has been played at more than 100 retirement ceremonies for security guards, police officers, firefighters, people who spent their lives standing watch. He said that song isn't really about me anymore. It's about all of us who show up. As the kids filed out, Marcus lingered. Mr. Frank, do you really think someone like me could be something more than this? Frank stood, putting a firm hand on the boy's shoulder. Marcus, I was a high school dropout. My father was a drunk. My mother cleaned offices at night. Everyone said I'd amount to nothing. But here I am, 77 years old, and Bruce Springsteen calls me a hero. Not because I became famous or rich, but because I showed up every day, even when it hurt, even when I failed. That's all any of us can do, show up and try to leave things a little better than we found them. Marcus nodded, clutching the harmonica Frank had given him. As he walked away, Frank heard him trying to play the opening notes of The Rising, off-key, hesitant, but trying. That evening, Frank received a call from Bruce. Frank, I'm working on something. A documentary about American heroes. Real ones. Not celebrities or athletes, but people like you. Would you be willing to be interviewed again? Bruce, there's been enough about me. What about... It's not just about you, Bruce interrupted. It's about the ripple effect. Sarah becoming a judge. The kids you're teaching now. The security guards who found courage in your story. The young man you mentored who's now head of security for the Smithsonian. The nurse whose child you saved from getting hit by a car in the parking lot. She became a doctor. Frank, your story keeps growing. Frank was quiet for a moment. You know what I realized, Bruce? That night you came to the mall, you didn't just save me. You saved all the lives I would go on to touch, all the kids I'd teach, all the guards I'd mentor. You threw a stone in a pond, and the ripples are still spreading. No, Frank, you were always the stone. I just reminded you that you hadn't sunk. 2 weeks later, a film crew arrived at Willowbrook Mall. But this time, they didn't just interview Frank. They interviewed everyone whose life he'd touched. Maria from the coffee shop, now owner of a small chain of cafes, talked about how Frank had connected her with immigration lawyers who kept her family together. Tom from the bookstore, now retired, shared how Frank had spotted early signs of his heart attack and insisted he go to the hospital, saving his life. The most powerful interview was with Angela Patterson, now 35. She had been the teenage girl Frank noticed being followed. I was 17, she said to the camera, tears in her eyes. This older man had been stalking me for weeks. I was terrified to tell anyone, but Mr. Frank, he saw it. He didn't just walk me to my car that night. He documented everything, helped me file a police report, testified in court. That man went to prison. I went to college. I became a social worker specializing in helping stalking victims. Hundreds of women are safe today because Frank Morrison saved me first. The documentary crew also visited the children's hospital. The Morrison Springsteen wing was bustling with young patients, many learning music therapy with harmonicas, a program Frank had started and funded with his book proceeds. Dr. James Chen, the chief pediatric oncologist, walked them through the ward. Frank Morrison comes here 3 times a week, always has since he retired. You see that little girl over there? Emma, stage 4 leukemia. Her parents were ready to give up hope. Frank sat with her for 6 hours straight during her worst chemo session, teaching her to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star on the harmonica. She said if Mr. Frank could learn music at 62, she could beat cancer at 8. She's been in remission for 3 years now. The crew captured Frank with the children, his gentle patience as he guided their small fingers, his joy when they successfully played a note. One child, a boy named Timothy with a rare bone disease, played an entire verse of The Guardian, while Frank accompanied him. Mr. Frank says we're all guardians, Timothy told the camera. Even when we're sick, we guard each other's hope. Later that month, Frank received an unexpected visitor at his small apartment. A man in his 40s, well-dressed but nervous, knocked on his door. Mr. Morrison? You don't know me. My name is Robert Chen. 15 years ago, I was one of the robbers who hit Willowbrook Mall. Frank's hand tightened on the door handle, but he didn't close it. Why are you here? I served my time. 10 years. Got out 5 years ago. I've been wanting to find you ever since, but I was afraid. I need to tell you something. Frank stepped aside, letting him in. They sat across from each other, the weight of history between them. I was 28. Desperate. Stupid, Robert began. My daughter was sick, no insurance, bills crushing us. That's not an excuse, just context. But when I was in prison, they played a news story about you, about Bruce Springsteen coming to the mall, about how you almost gave up. And I realized I didn't just steal money that night, I stole a good man's faith in himself. Frank listened, his expression unreadable. I've been out 5 years, Robert continued. I've been working, trying to make amends. I saved every penny I could. He pulled out an envelope thick with cash. This is $50,000. It's not enough, will never be enough, but I need you to have it. For the children's hospital, for the program you run. Frank looked at the money, then at Robert's face. Your daughter, is she okay? Robert's eyes filled with tears. She survived. She's in college now, pre-med, wants to be a pediatric oncologist. She doesn't know about what I did. I've never told her. Frank stood, walked to his window looking out at the distant lights of Willowbrook Mall. You know what I learned that night? When Bruce came? That we're all capable of falling, all capable of failure, but we're also capable of redemption. He turned back to Robert. Keep your money, but do something else for me. Tell your daughter the truth. Then bring her to the children's hospital next week. Let her see where her future patients are. Let her meet the kids who are fighting what she fought. And let her know that her father, who fell as far as a man can fall, got back up. That's worth more than $50,000. Robert broke down completely, sobbing. Frank did something that surprised them both. He crossed the room and embraced the man who had, in a way, destroyed his life and, in another way, led to its transformation. We're all guardians, Frank said quietly, even those who forgot for a while. After Robert left, Frank called Bruce. It was late, but Bruce answered immediately. Frank, you okay? Frank told him about the encounter. Bruce was silent for a long moment. You hugged him? The man who robbed your mall? I hugged the man he's become. The father trying to make amends. The human being seeking redemption. Isn't that what you taught me? That we rise by lifting others, even those who knocked us down? Frank Morrison, you're a better man than I am. No, Bruce. I'm just a man who learned that grace isn't just something we receive, it's something we give. The next week, Robert returned with his daughter Lily. She was 22, bright-eyed, determined. When Robert told her the truth in Frank's presence, she was devastated. But then Frank spoke. Lily, your father made a terrible mistake. but that mistake led to a chain of events that brought hope to thousands of people. The documentary, the book, the programs we started, none of it would have happened without that night. I'm not saying what he did was right. I'm saying that even our worst moments can be transformed into something meaningful if we're brave enough to face them and grow from them. Lily looked at her father, then at Frank. You forgive him? I forgave him the night Bruce Springsteen played harmonica in an empty mall. I just didn't know it yet. Lily began volunteering at the Children's Hospital, working with Frank and the young patients. She brought a unique perspective, a survivor who understood both the pain of illness and the weight of family shame seeking redemption. One day, while teaching a group session, Frank noticed a familiar figure in the doorway. Bruce Springsteen, baseball cap pulled low, watching quietly. After the session, they walked together through the hospital. You know what amazes me, Frank? I've won Grammys, sold out stadiums, been inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But the thing I'm most proud of, that night I drove to a mall in Jersey to play for one security guard. Because that one night has rippled out further than any stadium show ever could. They stopped at a window overlooking the children's ward. Inside, Lily was teaching Timothy to play a new song, while Marcus, who'd been coming regularly since starting the program, helped younger kids with their breathing techniques. Look at that, Bruce said softly. A thief's daughter, a throwaway kid, and a dying boy all making music together, all because a security guard refused to stay down. That's the real America, Frank. That's the story I've been trying to tell my whole career. As they prepared to part, Bruce pulled out a harmonica. Not just any harmonica, but a vintage one, silver with gold trim. This was Sonny Terry's, Bruce said, naming the legendary blues harmonica player. His family gave it to me years ago. I've been waiting for the right person to pass it on to. That person is you, Frank. Frank held the harmonica reverently. Bruce, I can't. You can, and you will. Because one day, you're going to pass it on to someone else. Maybe Marcus, maybe Timothy if he makes it through, maybe some kid we haven't met yet. That's how it works. We pass on what matters. That evening, Frank stood on the roof of Willowbrook Mall. He still had his access keys, honorary lifetime access granted by the owners. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The parking lot below was full of families, shoppers, people living their ordinary lives safely. His phone rang. It was Sarah. Dad, I have news. I've been appointed to oversee a new federal program, rehabilitation and support for non-violent offenders, especially those who committed crimes out of desperation. It's being called the Morrison Initiative. Sarah, that's not... Dad, it's already decided. Robert Chen's story, his redemption, your forgiveness, it's inspired a whole new approach to criminal justice. We're not just punishing people, we're helping them become guardians again. After the call, Frank played Sonny Terry's harmonica, the notes floating over the mall like a blessing. Below, he saw the current security guard making his rounds, checking doors, keeping watch. The cycle continued, as it always had, as it always would. A year later, at Frank's 78th birthday party held in the mall's center court, hundreds gathered. Bruce performed, of course, but the real performance came from Frank's students. Marcus, who'd been accepted to college, Timothy, still fighting but still playing, Lily, who'd started medical school, and dozens of others whose lives had been touched by a security guard who refused to give up. During the party, the mall's owner announced something unexpected. The mall's name was being changed. No longer Willowbrook Mall, it would now be known as Guardian Square, with a subtitle, A Community Center of Commerce and Hope. But I'm just, Frank began. You're Frank Morrison, the owner interrupted. The man who proved that a mall isn't just a building, it's a community. It's a place where lives intersect, where strangers become family, where falling down becomes rising up. This isn't just a name change, it's a recognition of what you've made this place become. As the celebration continued, Frank found himself standing with Bruce near the fountain that had been rebuilt and was now flowing again. "You know what I've learned?" Frank said. "That night when you came here, I thought you were saving me. But you were really saving everyone I would go on to save. Every kid I'd teach, every guard I'd mentor, every moment of grace I'd offer. You didn't just resurrect one man, Bruce. You resurrected a whole community's faith in redemption." Bruce smiled, that weathered, knowing smile. "Frank, I've written hundreds of songs, but you've lived one, and it's still being written. Every day, every act of kindness, every moment you show up, you're adding another verse." "What happens when I'm gone?" Frank asked quietly. "Who stands watch then?" Bruce gestured to the crowd. Marcus teaching younger kids harmonica, Lily checking on Timothy's medication, Sarah talking with Robert Chen about the new rehabilitation program, current and former security guards sharing stories and strategies. "They do," Bruce said simply. "All of them. That's your real legacy, Frank. Not that you stood watch, but that you taught others to stand watch too. The Guardian song doesn't end. It just gets passed on to new voices." As if to prove the point, Marcus got on the small stage and spoke into the microphone. "Mr. Frank taught me something. He said we're all guardians, every single one of us. We guard each other's hopes, dreams, dignity. Today, I want to make a promise. Mr. Frank, you saved my life, not from danger, but from despair. And I promise, I'll spend my life doing for others what you did for me, standing watch, showing up, rising after the fall." One by one, others came to the microphone, each with a story, a promise, a commitment to carry forward what Frank had taught them. The security guard who'd been inspired to go back to school, the nurse who'd started a program for elderly mall walkers, the shop owner who now hired exclusively from rehabilitation programs. As the evening ended and the crowd began to disperse, Frank found himself alone with Bruce one more time. "I'm getting old, Bruce, really old. Sometimes I wonder if I'll see another Christmas." Bruce gripped his shoulder. "You'll see as many as you're meant to see, and when your watch ends, Frank, know this. You didn't just stand guard over a mall. You stood guard over the human spirit. You proved that ordinary people can be extraordinary heroes. You proved that redemption is possible. You proved that falling down is just the first part of rising up." Frank nodded, tears in his eyes. "Will you play at my funeral?" "I'll play at your celebration of life," Bruce corrected. "Then I'll make sure the whole world knows that Frank Morrison, security guard, father, teacher, guardian, showed us all what it really means to be human." 3 months later, Frank suffered a mild heart attack. As he recovered in the hospital, in the Morrison Springsteen wing, surrounded by the children he taught, visitors streamed in constantly. Security guards from across the country, many wearing badges with FM engraved in small letters, a tribute that had become tradition in the security community. During his recovery, Frank received a package. Inside was a gold record. The Guardian had been certified gold years after its release due to a resurgence in popularity following the documentary. But more precious than the gold record was the letter accompanying it, written in Bruce's own hand. "Frank, they tell me this song has been played at over 1,000 ceremonies now, graduations, retirements, memorials, but I want you to know something. Every time it plays, it's really playing for you. For the man who showed me that heroism isn't about the spotlight. It's about the shadows where good people stand watch. Get well soon, my friend. Your watch isn't over. Too many people still need to learn what you have to teach. And remember, we're all guardians. But you, Frank Morrison, you're the guardian of guardians, the one who reminded us all why we stand watch."